Alright y'all, check this out. BCM right here, bringing you another Commander deck tech, and today we are looking at Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder. Yidris has a very unique ability where we're going to utilize the Cascade mechanic, because whenever Yidris deals combat damage to a player, as we cast spells from our hand that turn, those spells will gain Cascade. Cascade will allow you to exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less, and you can cast that without paying its mana cost. So the best way to interact with all these spells that you want to cast for free, we're going to have to do something what's called a wheel effect. So I'm going to promptly call this deck Wheelin' and Dealin'. So our primary focus is going to be protecting Yidris. That way we can cast everything else from our hand with Cascade, or give any other spell Cascade as well, while forcing our opponents to draw lots of cards, discard their hand, and get as much value as possible by drawing lots of cards and having a whole bunch of wheel effects. So let's get right into this. First up are all the wheel effects. And the most iconic one is Wheel of Fortune. Each player is going to discard their hand and draw 7 cards. The main benefit of this kind of effect is we're going to have a lot of other permanents trigger off us drawing cards, or our opponents drawing cards, or discarding cards, stuff like that. That's why we're trying to play as many wheel effects as possible. Next, we have Wheel of Fate. This is Wheel of Fortune, except it has suspend 4. So we put 4 time counters on it, and then we get to discard our hand and draw 7 cards after the last time counter is removed. Now we have Windfall. Each player will discard their hand and then draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards that were discarded this way. Now we have Winds of Change. This one's a little different. Each player will shuffle their current hand into their... Each player will shuffle their hand into their library and then draw that number of cards that were shuffled in. Now we have Whispering Madness. Each player will discard their hand, then draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way. So this is another Windfall effect, except Whispering Madness has Cipher. So once you cast this, you can encode this onto a creature you control, and then whenever that creature deals combat damage, you get to cast a copy of Whispering Madness. Now we have Dark Deal. Each player will discard their hand and draw that many cards, but -1. Now we have Incendiary Command. This one has a whole bunch of different options. You can deal 4 damage to target player, deal 2 damage to each creature, destroy target non-basic land, or each player will discard all the cards in their hand and then draw that many. So not only is this another wheel effect, but you get the option of dealing with certain permanents. Now we have Echo of Aeons. Each player is going to shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7 cards. This also has flashback, so for 2 colorless and a blue, you can cast Echo of Aeons from your graveyard at a later time to do this effect again. Now we have Reforge the Soul. Each player will discard their hand and draw 7 cards. This also has Miracle, so for a colorless and a red, you can cast this for the Miracle cost if it's the very first card you drew that turn. Now we have Time Reversal. Each player is going to shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library and then draw 7 cards. Then you have to exile Time Reversal. Now we have Time Spiral. You do have to exile Time Spiral, but each player is going to shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7 cards, but you get to untap 6 lands. Now we have some sorceries that are just going to help us get more lands on the battlefield and kind of deal with all our opponent's stuff. So we have Nature's Lore. We get to search our library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield. Now we have 3 visits. We get to search for a forest card, put it on the battlefield. Now we have Kadama's Reach. We get to search for 2 basic lands. One goes on the battlefield tapped, the other goes into your hand. Same thing with Cultivate. Now we have Farseek. We get to search our library for a Plains, Island, Swamp, Mountain card. Put it on the battlefield tapped. Now we have some removal. So we have Toxic Deluge. All creatures will get -X, where X is the amount of life you pay into Toxic Deluge. Now we have Blasphemous Act. This will cost 1 colorless less if there's more creatures on the battlefield, but it'll deal 13 damage to each creature. Now we have Vandal Blast. That way we can destroy a single artifact for 1 red mana, or if you pay 5, you destroy each artifact you don't control. Now we have Splendid Reclamation. Because we're going to be doing a lot of wheel effects, we're going to return all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield tap. This is going to be a very good way to put as many lands on the battlefield as possible. Okay, let's get into the instance. First up, we have Wheel and Deal. Any number of target opponents are going to discard their hand and draw 7 cards, and we get to draw a card. This is going to be a very good way to force our opponent's hand. That way, they never have a good hand, or they never get the chance to actually cast anything that would really ruin our game. Now we have Vision Skeins. Each player will draw 2 cards. This is a good way to force any kind of card draw when your opponents don't want to draw cards. Now we have Ancient Excavation. We get to draw cards equal to the number of cards that are in our hand, and then we discard a card for each one drawn this way. This also has basic land cycling, so we can pay 2 colorless, discard this, and search for any basic land in case we really need to. Now we have some counter spells. So we have an Offer You Can't Refuse. You get to counter target non-creature spell, and its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. You can even counter your own spell if you need the mana. Now we have Arcane Denial. This one I feel is probably the best counter spell in the deck, because not only is your opponent going to draw 2 cards, you're going to draw a card. That way, it still forces card draw no matter what. Now we have Counterspell. Now we have Negate. We're going to counter a non-creature spell. Okay, now we got some removal. So we have Chaos Warp. The owner of target permanent will shuffle it into their library. Then they reveal the top card of their library. And if that card is a permanent, they get to put that permanent on the battlefield. Now we have Back to Nature. We're going to destroy all enchantments. Now we have Cyclonic Rift. This one's pretty iconic. You can return target non-land permanent you don't control back to its owner's hand. Or if you pay its overload cost, you're going to return each non-land permanent you don't control back to its owner's hand. We do have 2 planeswalkers that are really going to benefit us from drawing cards or discarding. So we have Narset, Parter of Veils. What makes this card very effective with wheel effects is it's going to prevent your opponents from drawing all those additional cards. Because of her static effect, each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. She's going to enter with 5 loyalty counters on her. You can -2 her. To look at the top 4 cards of your library, you may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put that into your hand. She's going to do a very good job at preventing our opponents from drawing additional cards, but also she's going to help us by looking through as many cards as possible from the top of our library. That way we put the spells we need in our hand. Next we have Obnixilis the Hate Twisted. He's going to enter with 5 loyalty counters on it, and whenever any opponent draws a card, Obnixilis will deal 1 damage to that opponent. Because we're doing so many forced draws for our opponents, they're going to take a lot of damage, and we're going to win the game pretty fast. You can -2 them and destroy target creature, and its controller will draw 2 cards. Okay, let's get into the creatures. First up, we have Birds of Paradise. Now we have Ramming Up Excavator. This will allow us to play lands from our graveyard. because we're going to be discarding a lot of lands. It's going to be good to have that option to play those lands from our graveyard. Now we have Ancient Green Ward. He's going to allow us to play lands from our graveyard as well. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control, that will trigger a additional time. Now we have Jace's Archivist. For 1 blue mana, we basically get the Windfall. Each player will discard their hand and then draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards that were discarded that way. Now we have Averna, the Chaos Bloom. This is getting into the Cascade aspect of it. When we Cascade, we can put a land from among those on the battlefield tapped. So Averna is going to ensure when we're Cascading that we're going to get all the lands out of our deck. That way it's only spells. Now we have the Maelstrom Wanderer. He's going to give all our creatures haste. He's going to allow us to Cascade twice. Now we have Nekasar the Mindraiser. This one is going to be the powerhouse for whenever we start casting all these wheel effects, because at the beginning of each player's draw step, they will draw a additional card, and then whenever any opponent draws a card, it'll deal 1 damage to that player. Now we have Ixris, the Writhing Storm. Whenever any opponent draws a additional card beyond the first one they draw each turn, we're going to create a 1/1 green snake token. And whenever Ixris deals combat damage to a player, we're both going to draw that many cards. Now we have Nath of the Gilt Leaf. Every single upkeep, we can have target opponent discard a card at random. And whenever any opponent discards a card, we can make a 1/1 green elf. So all these creatures are going to either deal damage or provide us with more creatures just by having our opponents discard. Now we have Archfiend of Ifnir. Whenever we cycle or discard a card, we get to put a +1 counter on each creature our opponents control. So the more cards we discard, the more our opponent's creatures will be able to be killed off. Now we have Psychosis Crawler. His power and toughness will be equal to the number of cards in our hand, and then whenever we draw a card, each opponent will lose 1 life. Now we have Nim Mizaparoon. This spell cannot be countered, and whenever we draw a card, we can deal 1 damage to any target, and then whenever any player casts an instant or sorcery, we get to draw a card. So with all these wheel effects, we're going to be throwing around a whole bunch of damage. Now we have the Locust God. Anytime we draw a card, we get to create a 1/1 insect token with flying and haste. He also has an activated ability where we can pay 4, draw a card, then discard a card. And if the Locust God would be put into a graveyard, we get to return it back to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. We have our Soul Ring, our Arcane Signet, our Felwar Stone. Because we are a 4-color deck, we're going to want as many colors as possible. And because we're drawing lots of cards, we want to keep those cards in our hand, so we have Thought Vessel. Now we have Chromatic Lantern. Our lands are going to be able to tap for any color, and you can tap Chromatic Lantern for any color. Now we have some artifacts that we're going to use to protect Yidris, because we need Yidris to deal combat damage. So we have Lightning Reeves. This will give him haste and shroud. But more importantly, we have Whisper Slope Cloak. This will give Yidris unblockable and shroud. Now we have Temple Bell. We're going to use this to force each player to draw a card when they don't want to. Now we have Teferi's Puzzle Box. This is going to manipulate how each player draws cards, because every single player's draw phase, they will count the number of cards in their hand, and they put those cards on the bottom of the library. So ultimately, all these wheel effects, you're never going to actually be able to keep a hand. Now we have my personal favorite with Memory Jar. We're going to sacrifice Memory Jar, then each player will exile their hand face down, then draw 7 cards, and then at the end of that turn, Each player will discard their hand and then return their original hand that was exiled. Now we have Elixir of Immortality. We're going to use this to protect our graveyard, but also shuffle it back in. That way we can keep recasting all these powerful wheel effects over and over while protecting our life total by gaining 5 life. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. We have Exploration. That way we can play additional lands. We have Burgeoning. Anytime a opponent puts a land on the battlefield, we get to put a land on the battlefield. Of course, we have Rhystic Study. Whenever any opponent plays a spell, we get to draw a card unless they pay 1. Now we have Sphinx's Tutelage. This is going to punish our opponents whenever we draw cards. Whenever we draw a card, target opponent will mill 2 cards, and they'll repeat this process if they share a color. We can also pay 6 just to draw a card, then we discard. To punish our opponents for discarding cards, we have Liliana's Caress. Whenever they discard, that player will lose 2 life. Of course, we have Megrim. Whenever any opponent discards, it'll deal 2 damage to them. Now we have Fate Unraveler. Whenever any opponent draws a card, it'll deal 1 damage to them. Now we have Bloodchief Ascension. Every single end step, if a opponent lost 2 or more life, we put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension, and then if there's 3 or more quest counters on it, whenever any card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, they're going to lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. Okay, let's get into the land base. Because we are a 4-color deck, we're going to need as many specific colors as possible. So we have our Command Tower. We have Exotic Orchard. Now we have Zago Triome, Ketria Triome, Zeator's Proving Ground, and Xander's Lounge. Each one of these will tap for 3 specific colors, and they are fetchable. That way we can search for whatever specific land type they are. But these also have cycling, so if we really need to draw cards, we can cycle these to do so and get them back from our graveyard at a later time. Now we have all the shock lands. So we have Steam Vents, Burning Pool, Watery Grave, and Stomping Ground, Blood Crypt, and Overgrown Tomb. Now we have our check lands. So we have Dragon Skull Summit, Hinterland Harbor, Woodland Cemetery, Rootbound Crag, Sulphur Falls, and Drowned Catacomb. Now we have some utility lands. So we have Bajuka Bog, in case we need to exile all the cards from our opponent's graveyard. This is going to be really helpful when all our opponents have wheeled a bunch of time and they discarded most of their cards. We can just exile them entirely. Now we have Mika Koro, Center of the Sea. This is going to force each player to draw a card. And because we're going to be drawing lots of cards, let's keep all those cards in our hand with Reliquary Tower. We have 4 islands, 3 swamps, 3 mountains, 4 forests. And that was the Commander deck tech for Yidris Maelstrom Wielder. I really hope you guys enjoyed this wheeling and dealing deck where you're going to punish your opponents just for drawing cards. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have any suggestions on what might improve this build. I think this is a very powerful build. It's very streamlined, and overall, it's a very fun deck to play. I'll leave the link to the Moxfield deck list in the comments below as well. And until next time, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share these videos, and I will see you guys in the next one.